There's this idea when you see a stupid death in pro play that it's purely that player's fault, and specifically they just kind of ran it down, right? And I'd like to draw our attention to the concept of limit testing, or the funnier name is tactical inting. But I think this concept is largely misunderstood, and in all reality, I think it helps both the player and also the region move up and progress to another level. So I'd like to draw our attention to probably the most famous people of limit testing, which would be Faker and Caps. So a true master knows when to break the rules, right? This is a very common conception. You could think of, more traditionally, like artists, for instance. Picasso is obviously a famous person known for breaking the conventions of what would normally be thought of as painting, and he did kind of abstractions and things, and now people consider Picasso's particular art style like a definition landmark of something different, an abstraction of art. And he was a true master of knowing when to break the rules, and so he did so. Faker is another person that knows when to break the rules. Famously, Faker basically almost limit tests every single game, even to this day, which is, incredibly impressive. But that's how he's able to stay at the top throughout his entire career, is because he's been limit testing. Now, yes, sometimes he does look stupid, but most of the times, actually, they're only slightly low percentage plays. It's like a 40% percentage play to where it will work in his favor, which is not that drastically low. He still has a safety of margin, but also he just knows when to do that. And most famously, Faker has been known throughout history for faking pressure of acting like his jungler is near him when his jungler is nowhere to be found. And so the enemy mid laner thinks that Faker's going in for this trade, and he has his jungler in his pocket, right, on the side bush or whatever, but in all reality his jungler isn't there. And that's why we got the nickname of Bengi, the third summoner spell of Faker, right? It's because everyone always thought that Bengi was always around Faker, and so therefore it was this pseudo shadow pressure which allowed Faker to actually get a lot of advantages in lane. Now, Caps is on the other side of this, and more people consider him very ballsy, and he is ballsy. He's a very high risk player, and he does things that have low percentage, outcomes, but that's what makes him so lethal as a player and one of the best mid laners of all time. But, when he does a low percentage play, the thing, if you notice about Caps' plays, is that they aren't actually mission critical. He does plays to where if he fails, it doesn't mean that the game is over. Now, historically, way back in the past when he first started, yes, that was the case. He would do some int plays and it would literally cost his team the game. But now he actually doesn't do that anymore. But he still does ballsy plays. And if he gets the advantage, that also means that he wins the game. And there is the important part. So I want to share with you the difference of a kind of limit test of pro play versus solo queue, because they're very different, in fact. The concept of, let's say, going for a kill. Now, there's the idea of what I would like to call a guaranteed death versus a medium percentage kill. So this is the idea that if you're going in for a play, and the enemy mid laner is low and you're low, and you're trying to dive him or something. Now, it's guaranteed that you're going to die if you go for this kill, but it's not necessarily guaranteed if you actually get the kill, especially if, say there's a teammate next to him, you're definitely going to die, but you also might not even get the kill, right? So therefore, you shouldn't actually go for the play because it's a guaranteed death and a medium percentage kill, right? It's not a guaranteed kill, but it's certainly a guaranteed death. So the percentages just aren't in your favor. So that concept is actually used quite a bit in pro play, in the sense that they never go for those plays. In fact, they never go for the plays that are a guaranteed death, but, a question mark kill. Now, there is this other idea of, what I was going back to with Caps, and the fact that he doesn't do his low percentage plays that causes, game losing type situations. But I also don't see this within, call it the LCS, of doing a low percentage play that could win you the fucking game, right? And taking a playbook out of Caps's, and the fact that there are often situations to where I see, maybe a top laner doesn't grab a specific wave. Like, for instance, in the IMT versus Dignitas game, game 2 for week 7, right? The very end of this summer split, Castle ends up, both teams end up lane swapping, but, Castle goes with his bot lane to try and take the bot lane turret, and Dignitas are up in the top lane, but then they recall. And there's a fat wave dying in the top lane. It's like 4 waves, I think 5 waves even, as the last one is crashing. And Castle could have actually recalled, halfway through when that wave is dying, and say, okay, I'm going to call their bluff. I don't actually think they're there anymore, because Dignitas had actually abandoned that turret. And now the theory is there's a little game being played at that moment of, are they sitting in that bush, next to the top lane turret, or are they not, right? And so all you have to do really, though, is a recall lasts, I believe it's 8 seconds. You have to wait roughly 8 seconds, and then you just TP to the top lane, right? Because they're not going to probably interrupt their recall, and at the 0.5 last seconds, they definitely can't interrupt the recall. So it's just ideas like that, to where it's a medium risk percentage play, but you will win the fucking game if you go and TP that and grab that wave. Now, if you die, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to lose the game either, right? It just means you're set back personally. So it's plays like this that I think a lot of people don't consider when they think about limit testing or tactical inting, right? And I think what a lot of people point towards of the negative aspects of limit testing is a player like Bwipo. So Bwipo is a character that oftentimes does limit test quite a bit. And, he was criticized, obviously, I think it was in week 7, for doing limit testing and going for a trade under a turret when his jungler was actually trying to steal red buff. And I think one thing that's kind of bled over into Bwipo's playstyle is he's a big proponent of limit testing in solo queue. So if you don't know his practice, or like what he intentionally does when he goes into solo queue, and he's explained this on stream, which is the only reason why I know this, is that he'll like go even intentionally in the top lane, right? Maybe the top laner will mess up or do a stupid trade or mess up the wave or whatever, and he won't actually punish that top laner, right? He'll intentionally not punish the enemy top laner, and he'll say, I'm trying to get to a stage in the game to where I can practice something specifically that I want to practice that is under normal conditions that he would encounter in pro play, right? So he's limit testing in a specific area in a specific way, and he does that constantly. Like, that's actually how he trains in solo queue, is he just limit tests. And some people even hate him for, like playing with him in solo queue because he does limit test so much, right? So they maybe think that it's just going to be loss of LP. But as a pro player, that's what you have to use solo queue for. And I think in specifically what has bled over into his pro play style is limit testing is inherently ingrained within his play. It's now become habit. And that can be both a blessing and a curse, especially if you do it too much, which he seemingly does. But I think if you do not do limit testing, then you don't get phenomenal progressions of the state of the game or the evolution of the game itself. Like if we didn't have limit testing or players trying to push the boundaries of what is considered, normal play and ridiculous play, I don't think we would have ever got the insect kick or at least it would have taken significantly longer to get the insect kick, right? So that was a revolutionary play that no one had thought of, but it took Insect the ability to actually start testing and doing different things on Lee Sin in order to try and do ward hops and then eventually progress it towards, doing a flash or a R kick, right? To where you use your ult and then you flash behind them so that it preemptively loads the animation and then kicks them backwards into your team. We never would have figured that out if not for Insect. And to translate this over into the traditional world, like something I know, drifting. So in 2009 in Japan, the D1 GP happened, which is, if you follow anything like in America for drifting, it's Formula D, but it was Formula D before Formula D was a thing. And there was a driver named Kawabata, and he drove a 180SX, which is like a 240 over here. And he was one of the first people in 2009. He did a reverse entry drift. And so that was one of the first times that we had ever seen a reverse entry drift, which, if you don't know, it's when your ass end of the car is ahead of the nose end of your car as you're drifting around a corner. So you essentially swing out your back end like fucking crazy, and it looks like you're just going to spin out. But he was one of the first people to ever do that. And suddenly it progressed the realm or the driving of drifting forever. And now you see a lot of different drivers within, professional drifting actually do that style. And it's because of him. He might have not been the first guy to ever, literally do it, but he was certainly the most popular person at the time to ever do it. But the whole point is that limit testing is very important for the progression of the game and for skills, just as a player. But the negative side of it is it also warps your entire team's identity if you do it too much. And I'd like to point out in history towards one person who completely did that, which was Geracie. So if you don't remember Geracie, he was on Evil Geniuses, and what he did was he would often just take ridiculous trades in the mid lane. And he was frankly playing quite disrespectful a lot of the time. But one interesting thing was he would often trade his health bar for either CS or for damage against the enemy. And he would get these weird micro advantages that you would just think wouldn't normally be possible. And it looked like he was kind of getting shit on lane, but in reality, he was actually building up a CS lead. And so he would do these things, and then on top of that, he would go in the side lane and try and 1v1 someone and just go super aggressive and hardcore. Like, he wouldn't handshake ever. And this was really different. And Evil Geniuses had to construct their entire team identity around this single player. There was no other way it was going to work. Svenskeren had to play around Geracie, or else he was just going to constantly int. And so Svenskeren knew this and literally structured his jungling around the mid lane itself to where, he could actually enable Geracie to do the things that he did and not get punished so heavily. Now, I bring all of this up because in Cloud9 for Nisqy of 2020, he said that some teams basically just int and play aggro and scrims and then look completely different on stage. And this was in an interview that I did with him in 2020. And that's completely true, that there can be a playstyle that changes from scrims to on stage because people aren't limit testing on stage either because they're too afraid. So they strictly just leave it in scrims, which I think is a bad idea actually, because you obviously need to apply that limit testing onto the stage, or else what the fuck is the point in doing the practice to begin with? Now, I want to point out one individual that actually allowed this to happen, which was Peter Dunn. So Peter Dunn, he did a interview with Nick Geracie on Inven Global talking about basically implementing something called limit testing days on Mad Lions. So he said, basically on Mad Lions, we had limit testing days to where we would let players just go 0-7, and just do stupid shit. But what he would do is he wouldn't point out like, hey, you did this wrong. You obviously died here. You shouldn't do that again. No, he would obviously gloss that over because the player generally would know that they fucked up anyways. And he would let that go to one side and just go on overall general ideas about the game. And I think this is a really smart approach. And this is a really good way to influence your players and actually put them towards a state of learning something new. And if you don't know about this concept, and I'm not sure if Peter Dunn even knows about this concept, but this is actually something real within the field of psychology, and it's called the zone of proximal development. So this zone of proximal development was developed by a Russian psychologist called Lev Vygotsky. And this was, I think, back in like the early 1900s or some shit. And basically what he said was that essentially a child develops in a way to where they need help in order to progress their knowledge base, right? There are things that a child knows how to do by themselves. And then there's another zone, which is the zone of proximal development, to where they kind of know how to do something, but they actually need help and they need a parent to facilitate, learning that particular skill. So for instance, reading. How to teach a child to read is that obviously you sit down with them with a book and you read them a book, right? And that's how you start out. You just read them the entire book, a bedtime story, whatever. And, maybe you show them the pictures and stuff and you show that you're actually reading, but they don't know how to read any of the words. And then they start to pick it up, though, because they realize what you're doing. And so now maybe you point towards one of the words and you say, what does that word say? And you spell it out with them and you say, disaster, right? Or feeding, right? And you spell, and now they know, okay, that word says feeding, right? And so you do more and more of those words. And eventually you can have the child say, okay, I want you to read this part of the bedtime story. And so they stumble through it and you help them read and whatnot. And that is the zone of proximal development. That's how you actually allow a child to be able to learn the skills how to read, something that the average League of Legends player doesn't know how to do. So this is what Peter Dunn was doing. And it's a really smart way to allow your team to grow and to actually, figure out their own play style. And this goes against the grain of the traditional way within North America of how teams play. And frankly, this is why I think limit testing is so important and why maybe the community shouldn't be as harsh as they are currently. Because when we look in the past of North America and its play style historically, it's quite frankly been just pure handshake. It's been teams just handshake constantly, and then you develop the whole idea of the NA RAM, where both the teams just go mid because they agree to go mid, and that's the only thing that they know how to do. They don't push or manage the side waves, and so all this fucking gold just ends up dying, and they just sit there in the mid lane staring at each other until one person makes a stupid mistake. And that's been how North America has played basically throughout all time. The better team just eventually waits for the mistake of the other team, and usually that was TSM just waiting for some other team to fuck up. So I'd rather have this area to where we do see this limit testing. We do see people, tactical inting, quote unquote, not the player. And because who likes to see tactical int? And so I do like to see this because I think it does actually progress the entire region as a whole, and it actually tries to level them up. Now, that should be said that it shouldn't be done without intention. That's what limit testing is. It's being done with intention. It's doing something out of boundaries, but also realizing that you're doing what you're doing is out of boundaries. So I think this is a good thing for North America. I think limit testing is a good idea, and I think players are kind of getting too much flack for that in this regard. And I think in order to progress the region of the LCS, we need to allow more limit testing.